December 11th, 1978. John F. Kennedy International Airport, Queens, New York. A cold wind cuts across the tarmac. Inside the Lufthansa cargo terminal, night shift workers move quietly through routine paperwork. Pallets of international shipments sit stacked under dim, fluorescent light. Everything feels ordinary, until it isn't. Just after 3 a.m., a group of masked men enters the building. They move with precision. No shouting, no chaos. They know exactly where they're going. Within minutes, the guards are disarmed. Employees are forced to the ground, hands zip-tied behind their backs. One of the robbers leans in close to his supervisor. "Don't look at me. Don't remember anything." It's calm, controlled, professional. The men head straight for the vault. Inside are shipments of untraceable cash, currency flown in from overseas. Millions of dollars. Unregistered, unprotected by modern tracking systems. Easy to move, impossible to trace. By the time the crew leaves, they have taken approximately $5 million in cash and nearly $1 million in jewelry. At the time, it is the largest cash robbery in American history. No alarms, no resistance, no bodies, just silence, and then disappearance. The robbery shocks New York, but inside the underworld, it sends a different message. Someone just stole millions. And worse, they stole it from the mafia. The man at the center of it all was not a boss, not a made man, not even Italian. His name was Henry Hill, and he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Henry Hill had grown up in Brooklyn, surrounded by the quiet influence of organized crime. From a young age, he was drawn to it. The cars, the money, the respect. By his teenage years, Hill was already running errands for members of the Lucchese crime family. Small jobs at first, parking cars, delivering packages, watching and learning. But in the mafia, proximity is everything. And Hill was in the right place. He became closely associated with James Burke, known on the street as Jimmy the Gent. Burke was Irish, ruthless, highly respected, a man who couldn't officially be made, but operated with the authority of someone who might as well have been. Burke controlled crews involved in hijacking trucks, stealing cargo, and moving stolen goods across the city. And Henry Hill became one of his most trusted associates. Through Burke, Hill was introduced to another rising figure, Thomas DeSimone. Young, violent, unpredictable, DeSimone had a reputation. He didn't just commit crimes. He enjoyed them. Together, they formed a tight circle. They ran hijackings. They moved drugs. They collected money. And they operated under the protection of higher-ranking members of the Lucchese family, including powerful figures like Paul Vario. Vario was a capo, old school, careful. He believed in control, and above all, he believed in rules. But Henry Hill was not a rule follower. He was ambitious, restless, and drawn to risk. By the late 1970s, Hill had become deeply involved in multiple rackets. Hijackings were his specialty. They would identify valuable shipments, intercept trucks, and redirect the cargo before anyone realized it was gone. It was efficient, profitable, and dangerous. But then came the opportunity that would change everything. The Lufthansa heist. The plan didn't come from Henry Hill. It originated with a small-time criminal named Louis Werner. Werner worked at JFK Airport. He had access, information, and debt. Gambling debts. Heavy ones. He owed money to mob-connected bookmakers. And in the mafia, debts don't stay unpaid. Werner knew something. Shipments of foreign currency were regularly flown into JFK. Millions of dollars. Minimal security. Predictable schedules. He shared this information with associates connected to the Lucchese family. Eventually, it reached Jimmy Burke. Burke understood immediately. This wasn't just another hijacking. This was something bigger, cleaner, more controlled. The plan was developed carefully. Surveillance of the cargo terminal, timing of shipments, security routines. Everything was mapped out. Henry Hill wasn't directly inside the robbery crew, but he was part of the operation. He helped coordinate logistics, connections, support. On the night of December 11th, the plan executed perfectly. Too perfectly. The crew escaped into the darkness of Queens. The money was loaded into vehicles. Within hours, it vanished into the city. Hidden, divided, disappearing into a network of safe locations. For a brief moment, it looked like the perfect crime. But in organized crime, success creates attention, and attention creates problems. Almost immediately, things began to unravel. One of the first mistakes came from inside the crew. A getaway van used in the robbery was discovered just days later, parked illegally, abandoned. Inside were fingerprints, evidence, connections. It wasn't supposed to happen. The plan had been airtight, but someone got careless. And in the mafia, carelessness is a death sentence. Jimmy Burke realized the situation quickly. The FBI was watching, investigating, connecting dots. And there was another problem: the money. Millions of dollars have been stolen. But instead of laying low, some of the participants started spending. Expensive cars, jewelry, fur coats. Flashy, obvious. Burke saw it as a threat, not just to himself, but to the entire operation. According to mob logic, loose ends must be removed. One by one, people connected to the heist began disappearing. First, it was associates, low-level participants, drivers, helpers. Then, closer connections. People who knew too much, people who talked too much, people who spent too much. Bodies started turning up. Some never found. Others discovered weeks or months later. The message was clear. Silence was not optional. Henry Hill watched it happen. From the inside, he had seen violence before, but this was different. This was systematic, calculated. People he knew, people he worked with, were being erased. And he understood something terrifying. This wasn't just about cleaning up the robbery. This was about control. Jimmy Burke wasn't just protecting the heist. He was eliminating risk. And in that process, anyone could become a target, even Henry Hill. At the same time, the FBI intensified its investigation. Agents began tracking movements, listening, watching, building a case. The Lufthansa heist had become a national story. Law enforcement pressure increased. Surveillance expanded. Henry Hill found himself caught between two forces. On one side, the mafia, silent, deadly, unforgiving. On the other, the federal government, patient, relentless. And somewhere in the middle, a growing realization. The money was gone. The crew was disappearing. And the walls were closing in. Hill had spent his life chasing the dream of being part of the mob. The power, the money, the respect. But now, he was beginning to see the truth. There was no loyalty, no safety, no escape, only rules and consequences. And Henry Hill had broken one of them. He was still alive, but not for long. Because in the world of organized crime, when you take from the mob, you don't just disappear, you get erased. January 1979, Queens, New York. The snow falls quietly over empty streets. But beneath the calm, the aftermath has begun. The Lufthansa heist is no longer just a robbery. It is a problem, a growing one. Inside the Lucchese crime family, tension spreads. Too many people know. Too many mistakes have already been made. And the FBI is getting closer. At the center of it all, James Burke, calm on the outside, calculating underneath. Burke understands something most of the others don't. The robbery was perfect, but the aftermath is what destroys you. And so, he begins to clean up. It starts quietly. No announcements, no meetings, just decisions. One of the first problems is visibility. Members of the crew are spending money. Fast, recklessly. New Cadillacs appear in driveways. Expensive clothes, gold jewelry, cash flowing through neighborhoods that shouldn't have it. To Burke, this is betrayal, not emotional betrayal, operational betrayal. You lay low, he reportedly tells associates. You don't spend, but not everyone listens. Among them is Parnell Edwards, a key participant. Edwards had helped execute the robbery. He knew details, faces, locations. But then, he starts spending. A new car, cash purchases, attention. That's all it takes. Within weeks of the robbery, Edwards is dead. Shot. Execution style. The message spreads instantly. No one says it out loud, but everyone understands. The money comes with rules, and breaking them has consequences. Next is Louis Cafra. Cafra had also been part of the heist. He too gets careless. His wife is seen wearing a luxurious fur coat, a visible sign of sudden wealth. It's enough. Cafra disappears. No warning, no explanation, just gone. And then, the pattern accelerates. Robert McMahon, found dead. Martin Krugman, missing, believed killed. Each name is another loose end, another risk removed. The circle tightens. For Henry Hill, it becomes impossible to ignore. He watches as people he once stood beside vanished, not arrested, not questioned, erased. Hill begins to understand something deeper. This was never about sharing the money. This was about controlling it, and controlling who survives. At the same time, the FBI moves in. Surveillance teams track movements across Brooklyn and Queens. Phone lines are monitored. Informants are cultivated. The Lufthansa case becomes a priority. Agents know the robbery wasn't random. It was organized, structured, and they know the fingerprints lead back to the mafia. But proving it is another matter. Inside the world of organized crime, silence is enforced, not by loyalty, but by fear. Still, the investigation continues. Meanwhile, Henry Hill is dealing with a different problem. Drugs. Against the wishes of higher-ranking members like Paul Vario, Hill had been involved in narcotics trafficking. It was one of the few rules in the mafia that was taken seriously. Stay away from drugs. Not because it was immoral, but because it brought attention. Long sentences. Federal pressure. Hill ignored it. Cocaine. Heroin. Distribution networks. The money was fast, but so was the risk. By early 1980, that risk catches up to him. Hill is arrested on drug charges. For the first time, he is completely exposed. No protection, no crew, no control, just a prison cell. And time to think, time to remember, time to realize. Outside, the cleanup continues. One name stands out: Thomas DeSimone. Violent, unpredictable, a man who had committed multiple murders. He had been part of the Lufthansa circle, close to Burke, close to Hill. But DeSimone had his own problems. He had killed people without permission, including individuals connected to other families. That kind of behavior doesn't go unnoticed. In the mafia, violence is allowed, but only when approved. By early 1979, DeSimone is called to a meeting, a routine thing, or so it seems. He never comes back. No body is ever officially recovered, but the message is clear. Even those inside the circle are not safe. Henry Hill hears about it later, from inside a jail cell, and something changes. For years, he believed in the system, the structure, the hierarchy, but now he sees it differently. There is no structure, only survival. There is no loyalty, only convenience. And the moment you become a risk, you are removed. Hill begins to connect the pieces. The heist, the killings, the disappearances. It wasn't chaos. It was strategy. Jimmy Burke had done exactly what needed to be done. He reduced exposure. He removed witnesses. He controlled the narrative. And most importantly, he kept the money. But Hill also realizes something else. If the killings continue, eventually, they will reach him. He knows too much. He was too close. And now, he is vulnerable. At the same time, federal prosecutors are building their case. The drug charges against Hill carry serious weight. Decades in prison. No deals. No protection. Just time. And inside that pressure, a question begins to form. A dangerous one. What happens if he talks? For a man raised in the mafia, that question is unthinkable. Talking is betrayal. And betrayal means death. But prison changes things. Isolation. Fear. Reality. Hill is no longer surrounded by protection. No longer shielded by the illusion of power. He is alone. And for the first time, he begins to consider something he never had before. A way out. Because outside those prison walls, the cleanup is still happening. And somewhere in New York, Jimmy Burke is still watching, still calculating, still deciding who stays and who disappears next. May 1980, New York City, a quiet federal office. No cameras, no headlines, just a table and a decision. Henry Hill sits across from federal agents. His life has narrowed to a single moment. A choice: stay silent or survive. For years, Hill lived by a single rule: never talk. Not to police, not to outsiders, not even under pressure. Because in the mafia, silence isn't loyalty, it's survival. But now, survival means something different. Hill knows what happened to the others. Parnell Edwards, dead. Louis Caffra, missing. Martin Krugman, gone. Thomas DeSimone, vanished. The pattern is clear. The closer you were to the Lufthansa heist, the shorter your future became. And Henry Hill was closer than most. Across the table, federal agents don't threaten him. They don't need to. They offer something else. Protection. A new identity. A way out. It's something no mobster is supposed to consider. But Hill isn't thinking like a mobster anymore. He's thinking like a man who wants to live. And so, he talks. The words come slowly at first. Carefully. Measured. Then faster. Names. Dates. Operations. Hijackings. Drug networks. Murders. And most importantly, the structure. Hill explains how the Lucchese crime family operates. How crews are organized. How money flows. How orders are given. He describes Paul Vario. Old school leadership. Strict control. He details the role of James Burke. The architect. The enforcer. The man behind the Lufthansa heist's aftermath. And then, he connects the killings. The cleanup. The disappearances. One by one. He lays it out. For federal agents, it's everything they've been waiting for. For the mafia, it's the worst possible outcome. A made insider. Breaking the code. The case builds quickly. Arrests follow. Charges stack. Racketeering. Drug trafficking. Murder conspiracies. The illusion of invincibility begins to crack. For decades, organized crime had operated in the shadows, protected by silence, strengthened by fear. Now, that silence is broken. Henry Hill enters the Witness Protection Program. A new name, a new life, but not a free one, because even in hiding, the past doesn't disappear. It follows. Meanwhile, the consequences ripple through the underworld. James Burke is arrested, not for the Lufthansa heist. There's not enough direct evidence for that, but for other crimes. He is eventually convicted in connection with the murder of associate Richard Eaton, sentenced to life in prison. The man who orchestrated one of the largest robberies in American history will never walk free again. Paul Vario is also convicted, his empire dismantled, his influence reduced to nothing. He dies in prison. The structure that once seemed untouchable begins to collapse, and the Lufthansa heist. The money is never fully recovered. Millions of dollars. Gone. Scattered through hidden channels. Lost to time. But the cost of that money becomes clear. Dozens of lives destroyed. Some killed. Some imprisoned. And one man, forced to live forever in hiding. Years later, Henry Hill reflects on his life. The glamour. The power. The illusion. All I ever wanted, he once said, was to be a gangster. And for a time, he was. But the reality was different. There were no rules, no honor, no loyalty, only survival. And survival had a price. Hill would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. Because even in witness protection, the fear doesn't go away. It becomes part of you, a constant reminder of the world you came from and the people you betrayed. The Lufthansa heist remains one of the most infamous crimes in American history, not because of the money, but because of what followed. The paranoia, the violence, the silence. It exposed something deeper, the true nature of organized crime. Not a brotherhood, not a code, but a system built on fear, where trust is temporary and loyalty lasts only as long as it's useful. Henry Hill survived, but survival came at cost. A life erased, a name abandoned, a past that could never be spoken out loud. And somewhere in the shadows of New York, the memory of that night still lingers. December 11th, 1978, the night the money disappeared, and the moment everything began to fall apart. Because in the end, no one really got away with it. But even as the cases close, the story doesn't end. Because the mafia never forgets. Throughout the early 1980s, whispers moved quietly through New York. A name, a betrayal. Henry Hill, among those still loyal to the code. He becomes something worse than an enemy. He becomes an example. You see what happens when someone talks, a soldier is told. Not as a warning to Hill, but as a warning to everyone else. Because fear is still the foundation. And even with arrests and convictions, the structure doesn't disappear. It adapts. New faces replace old ones. New crews take over old rackets. The Lucchese crime family continues. Quieter, more careful, but still there. Meanwhile, federal law enforcement changes too. The Lufthansa case becomes a lesson, not just about organized crime, but about how to dismantle it. The use of insiders, informants, witness protection. It reshapes strategy, because for the first time, authorities realize something critical. You don't just chase the crime, you break the silence. And once that silence is broken, everything changes. Henry Hill becomes one of the most valuable informants of his time. His testimony contributes to multiple convictions, but his life in witness protection is far from stable. He struggles. New identities don't erase old habits. The lifestyle he once lived doesn't disappear easily. There are reports of continued issues: substance abuse, legal trouble, a man who escaped death, but never truly escaped himself. Still, he remains alive, something many of the others cannot claim. James Burke dies in prison in 1996. No headlines, no ceremony, just the quiet end of a man who once controlled millions. Paul Vario dies earlier, his power reduced to a prison number. The empire gone, the streets they once controlled, now controlled by others. And the Lufthansa money? Fragments surface over time, small amounts recovered, pieces traced, but the majority remains missing. Some believe it was hidden, some believe it was spent, others believe it vanished along with the men who took it, lost in the same silence that once protected it. The heist becomes legend, retold, analyzed, studied, not just for its scale, but for its aftermath. Because the robbery itself was almost flawless, it was what came after that destroyed everything. The greed, the fear, the inability to disappear quietly, and above all, the violence. Each decision led to another body. Each mistake triggered another killing, until the operation consumed itself. Henry Hill's decision to talk didn't just save his life. It exposed the reality behind the myth. That organized crime is not a system of honor. It's a system of control, where trust is temporary and loyalty is conditional. And the moment you stop being useful, you become a liability, and liabilities are eliminated. In the end, the Lufthansa heist didn't make anyone rich. It didn't create legends. It created ghosts, men who disappeared, names that faded, stories that ended in silence, and one man who lived long enough to tell it. But even that survival came with a cost, because in the world he left behind, there is one rule that never changes. You can take the money, you can run, you can even survive, but once you break the code, you are never free. Not from the past, not from the memory, and not from the truth of what it really cost.